Well, we'll call this meeting to order. We're lucky to have the Minister of Environment, Jim Prentice, join us today in our consideration of supplemental Cs as well as the mains as pursuant to Standing Order 81.4 and Standing Order 81.5. So I welcome the Minister to the table. I know that your time is short with us, that you're committed at 5 o'clock, so I will turn it over to you for your opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your invitation to speak to the committee. I have with me today Mr. Ian Shugart, the Deputy Minister of Environment Canada, Alan Latourelle, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Parks Canada, and Peter Sylvester of SIA. Mr. Chairman, 2010-2011 will be a year in which we hope to emerge fully from the economic recession, wind down the stimulus program that has seen us come through much better than many of our trading partners, and look ahead towards balancing our books once more. With regard to the environment portfolio, we have come through the tough economic times with solid progress on several key environmental priorities. Environment Canada's 2010-2011 main estimates reference level will total $1.1 billion. While it gives a snapshot of the annual planned spending for the department, these main estimates, if approved by Parliament, outline more planned spending at the beginning of the year from my department than any main estimates in recent years, and I will get into more detail in a minute. The estimates for Parks Canada for 2010-2011 total $805 million, a net increase of $185.7 million over the 2009-2010 main estimates. The majority of the net increase relates to improvements and upgrades to National Historic Sites and visitor facilities, twinning of the Trans-Canada Highway through Banff National Park, and for federal contaminated sites. I think it's fair to say that the investments that have been made in our national park system over the last several years are historic in size. Monsieur le Président, cette année est l'année.
Mr. Chairman, this year and next, Parks Canada will invite Canadians from across the country and visitors around the world to come celebrate 125 years since the creation of Canada's first national park. Come celebrate the centenary of the world's first national park service.
Assessment Agency, the 2010-2011 main estimates are $29 million, a reduction of $3 million from last year's, related mostly to the agency's temporary funding to cover shortfalls in resources needed to support panel reviews prior to 2010-2011. These resources were earmarked for sunsetting in 2010-2011. I would, however, note that the funding for Aboriginal consultations announced in Budget 2010 significantly closes this gap. Not reflected in the main estimates, however, are a number of Budget 2010 items that are typically reflected in supplementary estimates or through the Budget Implementation Bill. The budget includes more than $190 million for a number of departments and agencies in new measures to support a cleaner and more sustainable environment and help meet Canada's climate change objectives. This includes a range of investments from the Next Generation Renewable Power Initiative in the forestry sector to a new permanent commitment of resources to the Great Lakes, which we will discuss in a moment. Mr. Chairman, let me highlight some of our portfolio's activities, beginning with the Great Lakes Initiative. L'année dernière, le Canada et les États-Unis ont célébré.
Last year, Canada and the United States celebrated the centennial of the Boundary Waters Treaty between Canada and the United States, a visionary treaty for its day, which has led to the creation of the International Joint Commission and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. I am very pleased that the governments of Canada and the United States are negotiating to strengthen the agreement.
In decisive action to protect the water quality of the largest group of freshwater lakes on the planet. In fact, Budget 2010 includes $8 million per year ongoing to continue to implement the Great Lakes Action Plan. With this commitment, current Environment Canada funding to address issues in the Great Lakes is now in excess of $28 million per year. This includes government spending of $48.9 million between 2008 and 2016 to accelerate the remediation of specific areas of concern in the Great Lakes region, as well as $30 million over 5 years to promote the cleanup of Lake Simcoe, which is part of the Great Lakes Basin. This funding is supplemented by an additional $22 million annually from other government departments, bringing the total which this government invests on an annual basis in the health of the Great Lakes, Mr. Chairman, to $50 million per year. I would also remind the committee that federal infrastructure programs also contribute to the government's efforts in cleaning up the Great Lakes. Since 2007, the government has spent or committed over $325 million in the Great Lakes, on infrastructure programs that benefit the environment, most particularly improving municipal wastewater infrastructure. Peut-être bien qu'aucune investissement.
Perhaps nowhere does the Government of Canada's infrastructure investment make more of a difference to the lives of Canadians today and for generations to come than the funds invested to improve the management of municipal wastewater. In 2010, it is unacceptable that some municipalities continue to dump wastewater into our rivers, lakes, and shorelines. This government has taken decisive action, both in creating the standards and regulations that will mean cleaner rivers, lakes, and shorelines, and in helping municipalities meet those standards.
Work, but my provincial and territorial colleagues and I have developed a Canada-wide strategy for the management of municipal wastewater effluent. New draft regulations have been developed. They will be gazetted on Saturday, March 20th. I'm happy to report that under the Government of Canada infrastructure funds, including the Building Canada Fund, Green Infrastructure Fund, Stimulus and Gas Tax funds, over $3.25 billion has been spent or committed already for wastewater and water infrastructure. Those represent the federal contribution. In fact, such projects are a top priority for these funds. Take the City of Hamilton, for example. Just this past weekend, on March 12th, the Government of Canada committed $100 million through the Economic Action Plan to upgrade a water treatment plant. Our investment leveraged support from the City and from the province. The end result is a $456 million investment that will protect water, remediate the harbour, ensure the city's sustainable growth, achieve the objectives of our municipal wastewater treatment guidelines, and also significantly improve the health of the Great Lakes. Mr. Chairman, the era of dumping raw sewage into our rivers, our lakes, and our coastal areas is coming to an end in Canada. We have a Canada-wide strategy on municipal wastewater, and we are helping communities across Canada meet these new standards. Let me turn, Mr. Chairman, briefly to some of the highlights from Parks Canada. The United Nations has declared 2010 as the International Year of Biodiversity. Canada has made a major contribution by setting aside wilderness and water for the benefit of future generations. In fact, in the past few years, we have made remarkable strides. It took 121 years for Canada to set aside essentially 277,000 square kilometres of our nation as a system of national parks and national marine conservation areas. Since 2006, since this government came to office, we have added an additional 45,500 square kilometres to the system and have taken actions that will result in a further expansion of 40,000 square kilometres. In total, Mr. Chairman, since this government came to office, we have increased 30% the size of the land set aside in this country for such purposes. In addition, the Government of Canada has invested $275 million to improve the science, recovery, and overall implementation of the Species at Risk Act. Since 2000, more than 1,600 projects have been delivered under the Habitat Stewardship Program to protect and to assist the recovery of species at risk. And Parks Canada, as an illustration, recently announced the black-footed ferret to Canada after it had disappeared for almost 30 years. So, Mr. Chairman, as I come to a close, these are a few of the highlights of a very broad and far-reaching portfolio. We will meet the changing needs and priorities of Canadians for weather forecasting. We must respond as well to new developments in the environment, changing technologies, and increasing public demand. Budget 2010 includes $8 million over 2 years to support community-based environmental monitoring, reporting, and the collection of baseline data in the North. Another $18 million over 2 years will support the annual reporting of clean environmental indicators such as clean air, clean water, and greenhouse gas emissions. Nous continuerons également de nous assurer que les
We will also continue to ensure that chemicals that may pose risks to human health and the environment are managed safely through the Chemicals Management Plan. We want to accelerate the pace of risk assessment and risk management to address the substances that have not yet been assessed under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act.
Reduce the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that now encumbers the approval for large-scale resource energy projects. Let us be crystal clear. We are not talking about any sort of weakening of the environmental review process, especially when it comes to the oil sands. Nous souhaitons améliorer les
We aim to improve the efficiency of the existing system in order to attract investment and encourage the creation of high-quality jobs. We will reduce duplication, not the stringency of our high standards.
Manages some of the issues that affect Canadians most directly in their daily lives, such as weather forecasting, and it includes some of the issues that will affect their lives for generations to come, including climate change and protecting biodiversity. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I welcome the opportunity to be here with the committee, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate you respecting our timeline as well. You're well under our 50-minute timeline for ministers. With that, I'm going to be very judicious in allocating our rounds. The first round is 7 minutes to all parties, and then we'll try to get as far down the second round of questioning with 5-minute question rounds. Mr. McGuinty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. Minister, for being here. Minister, I wanted to pick up with you, if I could, on a question I raised yesterday in the House of Commons with your colleague, the President of the Treasury Board. And in my view, in our view, in the official opposition, it has a direct bearing on both the main estimates and the supplementary estimate C that we're discussing here today, particularly sub-Cs, which are due back next week in the House of Commons. I asked the President of the Treasury Board yesterday if he could explain to Canadians how much is being spent by your government on its national advertising campaign. I put to him yesterday that the estimates are now somewhere between $200 and $250 million. That media and advertising experts have confirmed it's the largest single media buy by the private or public sector in Canadian history. And in my view, in my riding of Ottawa South, I'm not convinced that my constituents have to see a bonanza of advertising on the 6 o'clock or the 11 o'clock news, or for that matter, every roughly 9 minutes during the entire Olympics. So whether it's on the internet or TV or radio or print, Canadians are being bombarded with what is now arguably, approximately, according to experts in the media, $250 million on advertising. And I want to ask you, as the Minister responsible for the Department of the Environment, which of course needs more and more support all the time, do you think, I mean, does this square with you, as a member of the Cabinet who's approved this advertising? Number one, does it square with you? And number two, can you help Canadians watching understand how much of this money has been spent, for example, on climate change and climate change measures in order to prepare this country for the climate change crisis that lies ahead?
In fairness, I'll just say that Mr. McGuinty's question is actually not relevant to the discussion, which are the departmental expenditures, supplemental Cs, and the mains, which relate to the Department of Environment. Advertising, of course, falls under Public Works, and if you want to ask those questions to the Minister of Public Works or Minister of the Treasury Board, that is another discussion.
Well, if I might, Mr. Chair,
I'll leave it up to the Minister whether or not he wants to
just
respond
on a point of order,
point of order, and make
yes,
sure
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, the Minister oversees Parks Canada's massive advertising budget. It's part of his supplementary C and main estimates expenditures. Parks Canada is running ads now and has been throughout the Olympics as well. I don't want to get into the Parks Canada ads. That's not my question.
But that's where he's responsible for, is just would be
No, I want to ask the Minister in his capacity as Minister of the Environment, how much is Public Works, how much is being spent by the Government of Canada on advertising for climate change initiatives, for example? It's about $250 million. The Minister of the Treasury Board President refused yesterday to give us a clear number, but our estimate's now about $250 million. We'd just like to know, and Canadians would like to know. They're seeing these ads every newscast.
Pleased to respond. Firstly, Mr. Chairman, I'm here to defend explain the estimates and the supplementary estimates with respect to my portfolio. I'm quite pleased to speak to that. You will find within the material before you $360,000 of Environment Canada advertising expenditures. You will find the details of the Parks Canada advertising campaign, which a total campaign over a number of years has been between $3 and $6 million. The purpose of that campaign has been to expand utilization in our national park system because we've seen a significant drop-off in attendance in our national park system. Pleased to provide those numbers to you, and pleased to respond to that. I'm not here to deal with the broader issues that you raised. There are other forums, as you know, that they should be raised. You do, however, mention the Copenhagen Accord and climate change. And I think it's important just to take stock of where we are there, because the last time that I was before the committee, Mr. Chairman, we were embarking towards Copenhagen. I'm pleased to advise the committee that at Copenhagen we were able to achieve an agreement in principle that I think represents a turning point in terms of how the world will deal with climate change. This is something that our government has advocated for many years, and we're very pleased with the outcome. It provides a binding agreement for the post-2012 period. I mentioned in the House of Commons today that as of today, 110 nations have come forward and have associated themselves formally with the Accord. This includes all of the major emitters, and of course this was an achievement that we set out to achieve, which we spoke about last time I attended before the committee.
Minister, Mr. Chair, if I might,
to achieve an agreement that all major emitters, including the United States,
you know
China,
what it's like in opposition.
India, and others.
You've got 7 minutes to ask questions. So I didn't ask you about climate change. I asked you about advertising. That's fair enough. If you say you have no answer, that's okay. Canadians will draw their own conclusions. But I have another question for you.
Actually, I did not say I didn't have an answer. I provided you with the details of advertising within my portfolio, and I said I was pleased to respond to questions.
But as a member of Cabinet, you're not in a position to speak about the $250 million advertising campaign. That's okay. Let's go on to theme number 2. Yesterday, Minister, I asked you in the House of Commons about your approach to science and communications of science. We learned that your scientists at Environment Canada cannot take direct calls from the media. We learned that they have to report any direct calls to your communications director. We learned that if they participate in a panel where media is susceptible of being present, and I think even if they are attending a conference where media is susceptible of being present, they must advise the communications office of your department, if not your own office. And if they are permitted to speak to the media, they must get approval for what they will say before they say it. Now, your answer to that question yesterday was that you said, well, it's not just the policy of Environment Canada,
that's right,
it's the policy of the entire Government of Canada and every department. To which I reply, Minister, censorship is censorship is censorship. So if you're saying that not only is Environment Canada scientists being censored, but you're saying every scientist in the federal government now across all 9 departments are being censored in this way, because it's never happened before at the federal level, and my rudimentary checking of the provinces, no province in the country has these standards of this regulation, which you brought in 2008. And just yesterday, your own department brought out a report,
Mr. Chairman,
that said that 80%, there's been an 80% decline in media coverage around climate change In large,
Your time has expired.
let me just ask the question. In large part because 4 of your senior scientists have been muzzled. I'd like to get your response to that for Canadians who are watching.
And Mr. Prentice asks that you make a very brief response, because I do have to respect the other wishes of the members here, that they all get equal time and not be dominated by one member. Mr. Prentice.
The response is very clear, Mr. Chairman. We have scientists that work at Environment Canada as employees of Environment Canada. We value their work. I value science, research, empiricism, wherever we find it. It's especially important at Environment Canada. I've not received any complaints since I've been the Minister at Environment Canada from our scientists who feel hampered. And so let's be perfectly clear about that. The rules that apply to any employee of the Government of Canada, quite apart from what their educational background is, are the same across the government. And there's nothing different at Environment Canada in any respect relative to the employees of Environment Canada. We value their efforts at science. We base our decisions as a regulatory agency at Environment Canada on the empiricism and the fine work that they do, and they're valued employees as such. The questions you relate back to 2007, 2008, and some counting of media interviews back at that time. They're not germane to the issues currently.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGinney, order, please. Monsieur Bergras.
Merci. Merci.
You have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greetings, Minister. Welcome to the committee, and I will come back to Mr. McGinty's line of questioning. We are somewhat surprised to see that Environment Canada scientists were muzzled, and to read in your communications policy that there was a guide for good scientists. But what surprised me even more was at what scientists sent me yesterday. There's a note on your website and even in your intranet site, and apparently there's an annex, and it says Environment Canada standards with regard to the publications, to scientific and technological publications, and their guidelines for scientific and technical authors. So you have a guide for communication with media, and now you have a guide for good little scientists. Now, if I look at page 4 of the document in question, in the approval process, it is stated that it is essential that the authors must ask themselves the 5 following questions, and this is within the approval process for the publication of scientific documents. Number 1, who is the target audience? Number 2, is it an official publication? And the 4th recommendation states, is the publication important and relevant to the policies, priorities, and regulations of the government? Mr. Chair, after publishing a guide to communications with media, they have now published a guide for good scientists. Now, isn't your department trying to direct research and scientific publications? Do you think that this respects the good principles of independent science? I'm going to express myself in English.
Science involve empiricism. They involve the integrity of research that is carried out by scientists, the accuracy of the information that they produce, the basis upon which they reach their conclusions, their methodology, and the way in which they report it. We value science that is carried out on that basis. You're referring to a document that deals with advice in terms of media communications, which is a separate issue than the way in which science is conducted. You're referring to a guide that simply asks what I would suggest to you are fairly germane questions. If a person, whether a scientist or a business person or any other professional, is going to sit down with the media, those would be questions that would be germane. No one is suggesting that in any way there is a limitation on the scientific research, the way in which the methodology is determined, what the conclusions are, or how they're reported.
Mais pourquoi mettre un guide, Monsieur le Président? Est-ce que c'est...
But, Mr. Chair, why publish this guide, does the minister not trust the scientists of Environment Canada? Is it because the minister doesn't trust in science? Because when we look at the federal Sustainable Development Strategy, this strategy was presented last week, and the minister reduced the greenhouse gas emission objectives, goals, and then he decides to muzzle his scientists, Mr. Chair, and then he's calling for program review. So I don't think that this is a sustainable development strategy. I think it's an environmental tragedy. The problem of this government, I think, is that it doesn't believe in science, and that's why it is cutting funding to the foundations. It muzzles its scientists, and then it publishes guides to tell them how to direct their publications.
My friend rolls a number of accusations into what purports to be a question. Firstly, with respect to the Climate Change Foundation of which he speaks. This is a foundation that was established in 2000. It has been provided with $110 million of public money to carry out research. It is not the only vehicle by which the Government of Canada carries out environment research or climate change research. I would remind my friend that on March 22nd of 2001, he voted against the creation of the foundation and its funding. So I don't know how it lies in his mouth today to call into question its continuation. He voted against it. My point is that this foundation has had 10 years. They've carried out important work, which we value. It is time to take stock of what's been accomplished, to assess the results of the research, to determine over the course of the next year what additional research needs to be done, and to hear from them. That's not to say that the government does not have many other initiatives that are underway which are extremely important to climate change. And I would point out, for the benefit of the members, that there are meteorological and navigational investments referred to in the budget that will allow Environment Canada to do work in Northern Canada, which has never previously been done. There's also reference through the Minister of Industry to the support, significant support for the RADARSAT constellation satellites that will frankly put Canada in the foremost position in the world in terms of its capacity to do climate change research, meteorological research, research relating to ice conditions in the north. These are scientific investments. They're not being funded through the foundation. They're being funded through the appropriate agencies such as the Canada Space Agency.
Yeah, 45 seconds.
J'aimerais comprendre un peu la logique du ministre.
I'd like to understand the minister's logic with regard to research, because he can find money to fund research on carbon capture and storage, but on the other hand, there's no money for the Canadian Climate Change Foundation. So, Mr. Chair, isn't this a demonstration of the fact that basically, for the government, research is limited to funding the oil patch and not to funding researchers who are there to model climate change?
Fund that was set up in the 2009 budget relating to green technology investments, which includes carbon capture and storage, does not it's not research investments. These are demonstration projects investments. They're important. I would say to my friend, if he's someone who is passionate about climate change, they're extremely important because the only known technology to abate carbon emissions from thermal coal plants is through carbon capture and storage. It is the only technology that has ever been discovered that can actually abate emissions. It's of obvious importance because the world is going to build 2,000 new coal-burning plants in the next 20 years. And so Canada, yes, is making signature investments in that technology. We will lead the world in that technology, and I submit to you that that's a shrewd thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Bigod, time fini. Ms. Duncan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And nice to see you, Mr. Prentice.
What's that?
I find myself quite frustrated in the questions to put to you because while you are the minister considered to be responsible for climate change and you are the signator for a number of agreements, including the U.S.-Canada Clean Energy Dialogue, one does not find anything in your budget related to that. If one looks extremely closely with a magnifying glass, one might be able to find it in natural resources. Nonetheless, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm hoping that you can answer to the best of your ability, because time after time when questions are put to you, you do speak about some of these technologies which you're proud that the government is financing. Among those is carbon capture sequestration. Almost half of your government's 5-year, $1 billion clean energy fund has been already allocated to 3 carbon sequestration projects, so far as I can tell from the budget document that you've tabled. Those monies have been gifted to 1 coal-fired power company in Alberta and 2 oil companies. Coal-fired power remains, so far as I've last looked at the figures, the largest source of greenhouse gases emitted in Alberta. Last year, coal-fired power, okay? Last year, Michael Martin provided the committee with Canada's climate change strategy, tabled presumably at the Copenhagen negotiations. That strategy reported that Canada is phasing out its coal-fired power industry. If that is the case, why the massive subsidy in the form of almost $1 billion for CCS? If it is not being phased out, could you also speak to the issue of how much additional money the government is planning to expand this year from that fund? More than half of it's already gone, and it's supposed to be for 5 years. In lieu of the fact, particularly, that one of the facilities, in fact, coal-fired power is, as we sit here, being expanded in Alberta, 2 new facilities about to be commissioned. One of those undertook that they would be commissioned on condition that they would operate equivalent to natural gas combined cycle, therefore substantially reducing the greenhouse gases. They have now filed an application to the Government of Alberta to renege on that, seeking to amend their license and no longer reduce to that level. So my question to you is, are we putting money after not? Why are we subsidizing the dirtiest source of electricity in Canada, purportedly if it's being phased out according to your officials?
Well, you raise an important issue, and that's the subject matter of coal emissions, which you and I have spoken about often before. I know you are passionate about this subject, and I think it's important contextually to start by noting that 41% of the carbon that is in our atmosphere today came from burning coal. Coal is the greatest source of carbon emissions and the buildup of greenhouse gases. The importance of carbon capture and storage, as I said earlier, not to reiterate, is that the world continues to burn coal. Canada doesn't on a relative basis, and I'll come to this, but the rest of the world does. And there are over 2,000 plants that are slated to be constructed in the next 25 years, all of them emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The only technology we know of to abate those emissions is carbon capture and storage. So I'm proud as a Canadian that between the $1 billion in the fund that you referred to, set up by the Government of Canada, close to $2 billion set aside by the Government of Alberta, another $1.2 billion set aside by the Government of Saskatchewan, we're actually leading the world in terms of investments to try to find a technology that works to reduce those emissions. Now, just to carry on, Canada burns very little coal. 73% of our electricity system emits no carbon at all. We have only 21 coal-burning facilities in this country. By contrast, the United States has over 650 coal-burning thermal plants at work today. Our plan, as Michael Martin spoke to before Copenhagen, is to deal with those in a regulatory manner.
My question then, Mr. Minister, is when can we finally expect your greenhouse gas regulations, and why do we not see any line item in either of the estimates for the public review of those regulations?
Well, we have adequate dollars set aside for the regulatory functions of the department, and you'll find those dollars set aside in the estimate. There is no doubt that the Department of Environment, as a regulator, has adequate resources set aside to do that. In terms of your question, where are the regulations? You will see the regulations imminently in terms of dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. You've heard previously that we are harmonizing with the United States all of the emissions from the transportation system. I can speak to that. That will begin very shortly in terms of harmonized tailpipe emission standards for passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks. We will go from there to heavy-duty trucks, and we have task forces that work with the United States on rail, shipping, and aviation emissions. And so you are going to begin to see the regulations almost immediately.
I'll take your word on that. On to wastewater. You've reported that under the action plan, the government has allocated $3.25 billion towards supporting municipalities to implement those regulations. It's been estimated that the cost is more in the order of $45 million. I'm wondering if you can speak to how the municipalities are going to be able to comply with these regulations. Do you have a compliance strategy? Are you going to be charging municipalities that don't upgrade? Is there a timeline? And do you have a specific budget set aside for Environment Canada to take action to protect source water, since Aboriginals, First Nations, and Métis are also going to be having to comply and really don't have the means and resources to move forward, so they'll need their source water kept clean?
Right. Well, firstly, just to clarify the record, the $3.25 billion that I referred to is a combination of investments in water and wastewater. The wastewater component alone is $1.75 billion, which has been either spent or committed, carrying through, as I recall, to 2014. We begin, however, with regulations, and I would point out that wastewater infrastructure, which by definition involves a decision on the part of the municipality to build such a system, is fully eligible for funding, whether you're talking about the Green Infrastructure Fund, the Gas Tax Fund, stimulus funds, or formerly the Building Canada Fund. Wastewater was an eligible expenditure under all of those programs, and that's why you see $1.75 billion that has been allocated. That is only the federal government's share, so you could make the assumption that that should be multiplied by 3, because you need the provincial share and the municipality's share in most cases. So that reflects the immediate investments that are being made. The wastewater regulations, and they've been published previously in draft, talk about a multi-year effort. We've taken all of the 4,000 wastewater facilities in the country. They've been prioritized into high risk, medium risk.
Deadline?
They have been prioritized into high risk, medium risk, and low risk, the intent being to focus more quickly on the high risk situations. I would submit to you that the City of Victoria or the City of Montreal represent more pressing cases than a small community in Newfoundland, just because of the nature of the water courses we're speaking of and the populations. And so it's necessary to prioritize these choices.
Time has expired. And the last of the 7 rounds, Mr. Warwell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, thank you for being here. I'm sure you're as surprised as the majority of us around this table that we have the Environment Minister here at Standing Committee of Environment, and yet the Liberals in the Bloc refuse to ask questions about the environment. So, but maybe they're happy with the good work that the government is doing. Minister, 2010 is the International Year of Biodiversity. I know that you personally are passionate about supporting biodiversity in Canada. So I'm going to ask you what the government has done, specific conservation actions that the government has taken since becoming government.
Well, thank you very much. This is, of course, the International Year of Biodiversity, and so this is an aspect of what is done at Environment Canada and Parks Canada that is extremely important, and I think it sometimes is overlooked. I made the point that in the course of time that this government has been in office, we will expand the footprint of Canada's national park system by 30%, which is an enormous achievement. That reflects matters such as the expansion of the Nahanni National Park, where in collaboration with the Government of the Northwest Territories and the Decho, we've expanded that park by 30,000 square kilometers. We didn't double it or triple it or make it 4 times bigger or 5 times bigger. It is 6 times the size that it was originally created as. In addition, there is work underway on other national parks. I would refer you a month ago to the fact that we established the Mealy Mountains National Park. Not much was said about it at that time in Canada, but this is a park which is twice the size of the entirety of Prince Edward Island. It is the largest park in Canada east of Ontario and National Park, and it represents really a historic achievement between the government of Newfoundland and our government to set this aside. It's augmented, in fact, by a provincial park, which is adjoining. We have discussions undergoing with the government of Nova Scotia relative to the setting aside of Sable Island, either as a wilderness wildlife habitat or alternatively as a national park. We have other park initiatives in the north. Torngat Mountains National Park Reserve has been brought into the national park system. We've set aside land on the east arm of the Great Slave Lake. The Natachio National Park Reserve, adjoining the Nahanni, has been set aside. So these are all very significant achievements, Mr. Chairman. There have been 6 new wildlife areas established under the Northwest Territories Protected Area Strategy. We have set aside close to 3 million hectares of wetlands and upland habitat under the North American Waterfowl Plan. We have worked with Kujau of the Haida First Nation to essentially produce in Guayhanas the world's first park where everything is protected from the tops of the mountains down to the bottom of the continental shelf through the creation of a national marine conservation area. We've created marine conservation areas in Lake Superior, and I could go on and on. I would add that there has been a different approach brought forward. We have also worked with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. They have acquired, pursuant to funding provided by the government in a previous budget, 136,000 hectares of land has been acquired and set aside. All of this is important because Canadians are passionate about our parks and our biodiversity and protecting of land. It also, Mr. Chairman, I would point out, has a real relevance to climate change, because not only are these lands biodiverse, but they are carbon sinks that are available on a scale, frankly, that no one else in the world is achieving as set-asides for that purpose.
Speaker, I've got about 3 minutes left. Minister, you touched on what happened in Copenhagen and the resulting Copenhagen Accord, and you led that delegation, and I want to thank you for your efforts and the strong leadership that you've provided. The Accord represents a package of outcomes that, when taken together, provide a significant step forward in the global fight against climate change. That package includes a clear recognition of the importance of limiting the average global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. It also includes a framework for developed and developing countries to establish international mitigation commitments. More than 100 countries, I think you said 110 now, including Canada, and all the major developed and developing economies have now submitted their commitments for incorporation into the appendices of the Accord. So it's been a great accomplishment. The outcomes that you had set, we achieved that. And again, congratulations on that. So, Minister, what are the next steps in building on this historic agreement in order to see real action on climate change?
Excellent question. I did reference some of this in the House as I encouraged our friends from the parties opposite to support the Copenhagen Accord and support the progress that has been made, Mr. Chairman. As of today, there are in fact 110 countries that have come forward, associated themselves formally with the Accord. 41 of those countries are developed countries. This contrasts quite sharply with the Kyoto Protocol. We now have essentially all of the developed countries, including the United States, as formal associates of the Copenhagen Accord. In addition, there are 32 developed countries who have associated themselves with the Accord and have submitted nationally appropriate mitigation actions. That includes Brazil and China and India. And that is, in fact, the historic nature of the achievement of the Copenhagen Accord, is to bring the major developing countries, along with many other nations, into the Accord. There are, in addition, another 36 or so countries who are developing who have associated themselves with the Accord with less formal undertakings. To go from here, basically the Accord represented an agreement in principle, a historic turning point. Over the course of 2010, I would submit probably into 2011, The international community is engaged in the process of converting the accord into a binding legal treaty. This takes time. It's a complicated document. In the case of Kyoto, it took, as I recall, in excess of 3 years. So we shouldn't be surprised that it will take several years to actually turn this agreement into a full treaty. Canada wishes to see that happen. We are at the table. I've just returned from Washington a week or so ago, met with the American negotiator, and we are working towards the next ministerial meetings, which will happen this spring, at which time we will take this the next step.
Thank you. Time has expired. We're going to go on to our 5-minute round. Mr. Scarpelladja, please kick us off.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, you've spoken a lot about RadarSat today in question period and then again today. As you've probably read in the last couple of days, it appears that the government of Alberta will be weakening its wetlands policy in order to accommodate the oil sands industry. And you probably also know that the mapping of wetlands in Alberta goes back to the year 2000, and it's not a dynamic mapping. In other words, you can't really project trends in wetland area and so on. Now, Ducks Unlimited was working with Environment Canada and the Canadian Space Agency up until your government took power to create a Canadian wetlands inventory. Yet funding from Environment Canada dried up for that project, so that it never got beyond phase 1. Now, you've spoken a lot about biodiversity and how much it means to the government, but in actual fact, it's putting the brakes, the government's putting the brakes on any effort to create a national wetlands inventory, which is extremely important if we want to preserve our wetlands. We have I think we're the country with the most number of wetlands, greatest area of wetlands in the world. So I'd like to know, is your budget planning to renew that funding so that the Canadian wetlands inventory can proceed? And my second question has to do with carbon capture and storage. You know, there could be some implications of carbon capture and storage for saline aquifers. Is Environment Canada doing any research on that? Are Environment Canada scientists allowed to do research on that? Thirdly, you say in your statement, and it was in the budget, that you'll be investing $8 million in Great Lakes cleanup, but the Obama administration is going to be spending almost $500 million. What accounts for the difference? And there's nothing in the budget that I can see about the St. Lawrence Action Plan. So is there going to be any investment in extending the St. Lawrence Action Plan, or are we just going to concentrate $8 million on the Great Lakes?
Well, Mr. Chairman, there's quite a few questions in there. I'll do the best I can. Firstly, with respect to the carbon capture and storage demonstration projects, I'm not aware of any science that has been brought to my attention that calls into question the impact of those CCS storage projects on saline aquifers. I'm not aware that
the Monk Center did a seminar a couple of months ago specifically on that topic.
Mr. Scarpelladja, the one thing that we always want to be show the appropriate courtesy and fairness for the questioning witnesses. So let the minister.
All of the investments that are being made will be made with full regulatory approvals and all of the necessary environmental approvals accompanying them, Mr. Chairman. And so those issues will be attended to. With respect to Ducks Unlimited, certainly this government has a very important relationship with Ducks Unlimited. I met their executive team a week or more ago, discussed these projects and others which we are working with them on. We have a very sound working relationship, as we do with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. I spoke at their annual general meeting about 3 weeks ago. And so we continue to inventory the wetlands that we have, and in particular with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, to work in southern Canada on protecting those wetlands and areas that are needed for biodiversity. You raised the Great Lakes, and I think it's important just to put some of this into context. The Environment Canada on an annual basis spends $28 million per year on the various Great Lakes specific initiatives that we work on. In addition, there are another $22 million per year that are expended by other government departments. So the Government of Canada on an annual basis expends $50 million per year, in addition to approximately $4 million per year of alien species dollars which are allocated specifically to Great Lakes initiatives. That is $54 million per year. You can compare that to what is being done in the United States if you wish, and you will find that on a per capita basis, Canada is spending more on science and those investments in the Great Lakes than is being spent in the United States of America. And I challenge my friend Mr. McGuinty shaking his head. He can do the math himself, but if the spending in the United States is $475 million per year and they're 10 times our size, our expenditures of $54 million per year would rate pretty favorably. In addition, there is the question of infrastructure, and I pointed out earlier that $325 million has been expended in the period 2007 to 2014 in improving the health of the Great Lakes. And so this is extremely important. I would add to that fact that this government is in the midst of negotiating with the United States on the modernization of the agreement that we have relative to the health of the Great Lakes.
Mr. Scarpalegis, time has expired, Mr. Minister, but he did ask you about the St. Lawrence. Do you have any on the action plan?
When I refer to the Great Lakes, I'm essentially including the St. Lawrence as part of those expenditures.
Okay.
Since it is the basin that drains the Great Lakes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Prentice. And Mr. Armstrong, if you can take us up to the top of the hour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minister, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you reached an agreement last year with the provinces and territories on a Canada-wide strategy for managing wastewater, and that shortly the draft federal regulations will be published in Canada Gazette 1 as a federal commitment to implementing this strategy. Municipal wastewater treatment has always been managed by the provinces, and we hear concerns in some parts of the country about the cost of upgrading the infrastructure in particular in these difficult economic times. And in fact, I understand that Newfoundland, Nunavut, and Quebec did not sign this agreement. Could you please explain for us why you feel it is still important for the federal government to regulate wastewater and what you're doing to ensure that this does not bankrupt the country?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that in Canada, in the year 2010, we should not be discharging raw sewage, untreated sewage, into our lakes, our rivers, and our harbors. That is, in fact, what has been happening in some quarters in this country. Some municipalities are better than others, but clearly there is a need for national standards, and I think as Canadians, I hear very few people who disagree with that. We've worked long and hard with the Council of Canadian Environment Ministers to arrive at these standards, and they are national standards. They will be brought into place in an orderly way. The drafting is completed. As I said earlier, we have priorized the infrastructure systems across the country. There's some 4,000 municipalities in Canada with discharge facilities. Those that need upgrades to achieve these standards have been categorized into high risk, medium risk, and low risk with a availability of additional time in the case of the lower risk facilities. I would say that the facilities which are more pressing are in larger cities where, for example, in the city of Victoria, we have been dumping raw sewage with absolutely no treatment into the Pacific Ocean. Both the British Columbia Environment Minister, Mr. Penner, and the Premier have indicated that this needs to be brought to a halt, and so discussions are underway as to what kind of infrastructure will be needed. Certainly there are other communities where significant upgrades will need to take place. The intent here is to do this in an orderly way over a period of time. All of these kinds of investments are eligible investments under federal infrastructure programs that will run over the next many, many years. But this will require prioritization on the part of municipalities to make these investments.
My second question has to do with, again, with the Great Lakes, and I just want to clear up any confusion. Could you please elaborate on government investments in the Great Lakes and the Seaway?
Well, certainly there have been significant investments. I referred earlier to the wastewater investments. You can look at, for example, a state-of-the-art water treatment facility that is being constructed today in Brockville that will significantly improve the quality of the water downstream. You can also look at the announcement that was made this past weekend in Hamilton, where basically we're looking at a $500 million facility. The federal government announced $100 million investment in that facility. So these are direct wastewater investments that relate directly to the water that is being discharged into the Great Lakes. And there are a number of communities that still require upgrades. Some of those are under consideration, under discussion, but these are the kinds of investments that will have to be prioritized and will have to be made.
I have just one more question. If you could also elaborate on the government's investments this year in our national parks.
I mentioned, as I recall, in speaking with the main estimates, that you would find $185 million of infrastructure-related investments that are referred to in the main estimates. What you've seen really over the course of the last 2 years are investments in our national park system which are historic in size. We allowed our national park system for many years in this country to be underinvested in. What we have done through economic stimulus, through the actions of this government, is to make very significant investments. One of the most tangible of these has been to improve the highway that runs through Banff National Park to the British Columbia border. The upgrading of that highway will be completed in the next year or more. It has been a highway on which there's been many fatalities. It's been quite controversial. That upgrade I speak to because it underscores the quality of the work that's been done by Parks Canada. People come from all over the world to look at the nature of the animal overpasses that have been built into that construction that allow safe passage of bears, caribou, deer, and so on over the highway. As I recall, there have been in excess of 200,000 sort of documented safe crossings by way of night cameras and so on at this point. And so people actually come from all over the world to see how Parks Canada does the extraordinary work that they do. Investments are being made in all the parks right across the country and historic sites. They're not limited to Banff by any means, but I simply refer that one to you.
Thank you, Minister. I know Mr. Ouellette would like to get in just one very short and quick question before we suspend.
Président, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for agreeing to take one last question. The money that you have set aside for the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River, you have earmarked it. Have you earmarked it for the St. Lawrence Action Plan, the strategy, and have you set any aside for the priority intervention areas to protect the St. Lawrence?
Included in the Great Lake Action Plan, you're aware there have been previous plans that have focused on very specific areas. We will continue to do that. I'm referring to the global budget of the department. The $54 million I refer to is not allocated to specific projects. It is the investment on the part of the Government of Canada on an annual basis relative to the health of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence system. The infrastructure investments I refer to, whether you're speaking of the stimulus funds, the Green Infrastructure Fund, the Gas Tax Fund, or the Building Canada Fund, these are all available on a community-by-community basis. And St. Lawrence investments are equally eligible, as are Great Lakes investments and others. I'm simply referring to the historic investments that have been made at this point, the dollars that have been committed by the government. We are aware that there are significant investments, particularly as it relates to wastewater. that will need to be undertaken. In particular, the City of Montreal has wastewater systems which are in dire need of upgrading, and that is certainly an issue that we're aware of and that we will continue to discuss with the province and the city.
Time has expired, and I know, Minister, you have other places to be right now. So I do appreciate you taking the time and fitting us into your schedule to be able to talk to the supplemental Cs and Bs, or Cs and the mains. Just before we suspend to go in camera, we do have our supplementary estimates that are due to be reported back. Do you just want to have them deemed reported back, or do you actually want to do the votes on the line votes, 10C and 25C right now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always a pleasure.
Okay, we'll suspend then. Okay, let's suspend and ask everybody that's not tied to a member of Parliament committee here to clear the room so that we can do some other committee business.